Call on Paula Kane to open the debate. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to bring this debate to mark Challenge Poverty Week 2024. And I want to begin by thanking members of all parties who signed the motion to allow this debate to take place. And I think it's important, an important symbol of the cross-party consensus that really ought to govern how we debate these issues in Parliament in terms of tackling poverty in all of its forms. Because whilst we will have disagreements on policy, I think it is important that Parliament is united in debating these issues, because we know that poverty in Scotland remains unacceptably high, and this year's report from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation highlights that very deep poverty in Scotland is up to 40%, having surged since the mid-1990s, and 240,000 children still languish in poverty as rates of child poverty remain static, as so much research, I think, has now demonstrated. So there is much work to be done, I think, across all spheres of government, in this Parliament, of course, and for the Scottish Government. But I, of course, recognise UK Government and local government role in this work also. And I said in a previous debate this week that I think it was very important that both the Secretary of State for Scotland and the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice launched the Joseph Rowntree report together on Monday and responded together, thinking about how they can embark on a new area of partnership in terms of how we tackle poverty. And I don't want to relitigate too heavily the politics of this issue and some of the politics we've had this week, but I do hope that this debate ends up being the discussion that we should have perhaps had earlier in the week in government time, that the government chose not to have, because I think it's important that in Challenge Poverty Week we show our respect to the third sector organisations and the anti-poverty campaigners who put so much into this week and all year round to ensure that these issues are at the forefront of our agenda here in Parliament. This week does provide, I think, a vital point in the year where civil society is able to come together and showcase what is happening out there and the best practice that is going on across Scotland. So in particular, I think it's important that I give mention to the work of the Poverty Alliance, who have coordinated Challenge Poverty Week each year since 2013. Bringing together all groups and projects is no small task, especially on top of all of the other work that they do year-round. And I'm pleased that we are joined in the gallery today by representatives of Poverty Alliance, and I'm sure we're all very grateful for the work and the briefing that they've provided to all of us members here in Parliament. So there is much work to do, and many areas where we do need different interventions. And as I've said, all spheres of government must take tailored approaches in different ways to ensure that we reach everyone, no matter what their background is. And I think that's very evident from the themes that have been highlighted in each day of this important week. We could look at an issue like housing. We have many debates in this chamber about housing, and we have recently. The effects of inadequate and unaffordable housing on poverty rates are significant. And we need to understand how the housing emergency affects different groups, and that's why I welcome Shelter and Engender's research published this week, showing the disproportionate effects felt by women in particular, and the need for a gendered response to the housing emergency. On transport, we need to support people to access their places of work, to access business and services, and to access their support network. So it is concerning to see the end of off-peak rail fares pilot, increasing costs to working people, commuting to work, the distance covered by local bus services having fallen by 15% since 2011-12, and the number of passenger journeys falling by 52% since 2007-2008. So there is much more we need to do in this place and across our local authorities by supporting and empowering them on public transport. And I'll give way to Paul Sweeney.
I thank my friend for giving way. He's making a very powerful speech highlighting that poor mental health on World Mental Health Day, as it is today, is a critical factor and is driven by the symptoms of poverty. And particularly when we look at, for example, people seeking asylum in Scotland, they were denied free bus travel. That has had a huge effect on their mental health, and it's particularly egregious. Does he agree that if we're to deal with poor mental health in this country, we need to solve the scourge of poverty in every possible way?
I
thank my friend for his intervention, and he makes a very important point. As we discuss these thematic issues, it's clear to me that poor health, and in particular poor mental health, is both a result of poverty, but also, I think, when we look at social determinants of health, is actually something that we need to deal with in a very, very serious way. And I think it's important that we put that on the record today to think about what our interventions can be in that space. And I thank him for the work that he does in that regard, and of course the work he's done in terms of free travel for asylum seekers, some of the poorest individuals in our society, which he raises today. We know that adequate income is an important theme of this week as well. In-work poverty is at record levels, and we need to look at the level of income that people receive to make sure that it meets the needs of working people. And I'd point here to the work of Close the Gap, who I met alongside other members of the End Child Poverty Coalition and my Scottish Labour colleagues yesterday, who have highlighted that inadequate income for women and the gender pay gap is directly tied to child poverty. It is, of course, why I welcome the work today by the UK Government to introduce that new deal for working people, which I think will begin to tackle the insecurity, instability and low pay in work that adds to poverty. I'll take an intervention from Claire Hawkey.
Thank you very much. I'm listening very carefully to what Paul O'Kane is saying here. And when he mentions child poverty, he knows where I'm going to go on this, about the two-child benefit cap. And would he join me in calling on the Chancellor to review that in the upcoming budget?
Paul O'Kane.
I thank Ms Hawkey for her intervention, and she and I have debated these issues many times, and she knows that I am committed to a review of universal credit that includes the two-child limit. That is the work that has been set in the context of the Child Poverty Task Force, which the UK Government is taking forward. The Secretary of State for Work and Pensions began that work along with Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson, because it's important, and I've said many times in this chamber, universal credit does not work. It needs to be reviewed in all of its parts, and we need to see a considered piece of work done to review all of those issues in terms of child poverty and how we reduce that. I want to briefly just touch, if I can, Presiding Officer, because I'm aware of time, of the work that's been done in food insecurity across this week and by organisations. We all know that it is a travesty that food banks are necessary in modern-day Scotland. We, of course, all want to, I think, work for a society where nobody needs to rely on them. But they do, of course, demonstrate the best people in our communities who want to throw their arms around the people who are most in need. And I'll take this opportunity, if I can, to highlight the many community groups in my own region who are running food banks and indeed food pantries and food security projects, and the work that they do is very admirable, because not only is it about the provision of food, but also trying to take a holistic view of getting support to people who most need it. And very often that can also, referring back to my colleague's point about mental health, support people with their mental health and with what is going on in their life. So I would point to the work of Morton in the community, the charitable arm of Greenock Morton FC, who host collections for Inverclyde Food Bank and offer a range of services at the club to support people. So I'm very conscious of time, Presiding Officer. I will finish by just highlighting one further thing that I think has been highlighted in this week, if I may, which is sustainable funding for the third sector. All of these projects are vitally important, but they cannot continue to do their work without sustainable and fair funding. And that is something that I know the Minister and the Government have heard me speak about. And it is very important that we reflect on that today. So I do hope the Minister might be able to cover it in summing up. I am very grateful for this debate. I hope it is constructive. And I'm very grateful to you, Presiding Officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr O'Kane.